No, I won't.
Pick up the soap, pup. The words sliced through the humid air like a knife, a command delivered with the sneer of someone who thought himself untouchable, and for a fleeting second, the echo of his arrogance hinted at a price he didn't yet know he'd pay. The prison shower room was a cavern of tile and steam, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting sickly reflections on the wet floor. The pipes rattled, spraying lukewarm water in uneven bursts, the smell of chlorine mixing with the sour stench of sweat and mildew. Around the open room, men stood half-washed, half-watching, their silence almost ritualistic, as if something sacred and cruel was about to unfold. 2 white inmates loomed near the far corner, both broad-shouldered, tattoos curling like snakes across their skin. One was missing a front tooth, his grin jagged and mocking. The other's knuckles were swollen and raw, the kind of hands that had broken noses and left bruises that lasted weeks. They were predators here, self-appointed kings of this tiled kingdom, feeding on fear as easily as they fed on their daily rations. And then there was him, the kid they called Jay. 18 years old, thin but wiry, skin glistening with water that ran down the tense muscles of his back. His eyes darted between them and the cracked bar of soap lying by the drain, the symbol of his humiliation. His lips pressed together, not quite trembling, but hard enough to turn them pale. "Didn't hear me?" the gap-toothed one drawled, his voice echoing against the tile. "I said pick it up. Don't make me ask twice." Laughter rippled from a few corners of the shower. Not loud laughter, more like sharp breaths through noses, stifled chuckles that revealed more fear than amusement. Everyone knew what this was. The old game, the ritual, the kind of cruelty that tested boundaries, broke spirits, and carved hierarchies into the walls of the prison. Jay's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his fists clenched at his sides. He knew the rules not written in any handbook, but etched into the cold cement of the place. Refuse, and you get beaten. Comply, and you lose something far deeper than pride. "Look at him," the other bully said, his voice low and dangerous. "Thinks he's too good to bend. That right, boy? You think you're better than us?" He stepped closer, droplets of water sliding down his chest, his shadow falling over Jay. "Nah, you're nothing here. You're ours to laugh at." The soap sat there like a curse. A simple piece of cracked ivory, yet it weighed more than iron. Jay's gaze fell on it, his reflection fractured in the puddle beneath it. Someone whispered from the back, "Don't do it." The words were faint, like a breath carried away by steam. But Jay heard them. His jaw tightened. The gap-toothed one bent slightly, almost nose to nose with him, and whispered so only he could hear, "Bend down! Show us who you really are!" Then, louder, to the room, "Pick it up!" The room grew quieter. The sound of dripping water filled the void. Jay's hands trembled, not with fear alone, but with rage, a kind of molten heat bubbling under the surface. His chest rose and fell, each breath heavier than the last. He bent slightly at the knees, and a collective hush fell over the men watching. The predators smiled. They thought they had him. "Good pup," the gap-toothed one mocked, nudging his friend. Knew he'd learn. But Jay froze halfway, his eyes lifted, burning with something raw. He stared at the soap, then at them, then back at the soap. He didn't move further. He stood locked between choices, every second stretching like an eternity. "Move it, boy!" The tattooed man's voice cracked through the air, fists flexing like he was already imagining the feel of bone crunching under them. Jay's breath came out shaky, his shoulders rigid. Around them, the silent crowd leaned in, their faces carved with the hunger of spectators in an arena, desperate for blood or spectacle. The fluorescent lights flickered. The steam swirled thicker. Jay straightened slowly, deliberately, his hands still empty, his body trembling not from weakness, but from restraint. His voice, quiet yet sharp, cut through the stillness. "I'm not your dog." Gasps fluttered around the shower. A bold defiance. A line crossed. The gap-toothed one tilted his head back, laughing, a laugh that echoed against the tiles. "Not my dog? Oh, you're my entertainment, boy, and when I'm done, you'll wish you barked when I said, bark." The other stepped forward, shoving Jay's shoulder hard enough to slam him into the wall. Water sprayed down over them, the sound of impact sharp, echoing. Jay winced. His teeth gritted, but he didn't fall. He didn't bend. "Pick it up," the man growled again, voice lower, more dangerous, "or I'll put you on the ground myself." The room was suffocating now, the steam carrying the heavy scent of anticipation, fear, and sweat. A bead of blood formed where Jay's shoulder had scraped the jagged edge of tile, trailing slowly down his dark skin like a crimson thread. Jay's chest heaved. His eyes locked on his aggressor. He didn't move toward the soap. The bully's grin faded, replaced by irritation, then fury. His jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening. The game was slipping, his power questioned. "You just signed your death, boy," he hissed, stepping back to wind up his fist. The crowd held their breath. Jay braced himself, and then the heavy clang of metal echoed as the shower door burst open. The sound cut through everything, the laughter, the tension, the pounding of hearts. A figure stepped inside, his presence filling the room before he even spoke. Taller, broader, his gaze cold as steel. The tattoos on his arms weren't crude marks of violence, but symbols of authority, known across the cell blocks, like scripture. His very posture radiated dominance, the kind that silenced men without a word. Jay's eyes widened. Recognition flickered like lightning. The bullies froze, fists half raised, eyes narrowing in unease. Because the man who had just walked in the boss of this shower, this block, this entire twisted kingdom, wasn't a stranger. It was Jay's brother. The room reacted with silence, then with the rustle of bodies shifting, the steam itself stepping back to make space for the man who had entered. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His eyes, cold dark, moved across the tiles, counting distance. The gap-toothed bully squared his shoulders. His friend's smirk slid off like water from steel. "Boss," someone muttered near a spigot, more reflex than greeting. The words settled like a warning flare. Jay didn't move, water crawling down his cheekbone like a tear. The brother, everyone knew him as Marlin, took another unhurried step. He looked at Jay first, a line pulled taut over years, then turned to the two white men and let the quiet stretch until they breathed too loudly. "You two?" Marlin said. Voice low, edges sanded by authority. "Tell me what you said." The gap-toothed one lifted his chin, hunting for buoyancy. "We were teaching him the routine," he said, trying on a laugh nobody bought. "Rookies forget their place." "His place?" Marlin asked. "Yeah," the other said. "He's new. Needs to learn." Marlin gestured to the floor, to the battered soap by the drain. "And this is education." A few men exhaled, wanting justice, or at least spectacle that didn't end with them bleeding. A guard's voice echoed faintly from the corridor, then faded. No rescue was coming. "We didn't touch him," the gap-toothed bully said. "Not yet." "Your mouth did," someone muttered from the line of shower heads. A ripple went through the crowd. Marlin's gaze returned to Jay. "You good?" Jay nodded once. The blood on his shoulder mingled with water and disappeared. Marlin stepped closer to the bullies. I run this block because I keep order. You know that. We were keeping order, the smirker said. He refused a directive. Directive, Marlin repeated. You want to issue directives, apply to be a CO. Steam thinned, revealing scars and suspicion. Say the words you said, Marlin told them. The gap-toothed bully glanced at his friend. His tongue ran across the jagged space in his smile. Pick up the soap, he said. Smaller now. Pup. A muscle jumped in Jay's neck, and when he didn't, Marlin asked. We were going to help him learn? The smirker said. Marlin's eyes cooled. He took one step close enough that water from his shoulders dusted the other man's skin. You think this is a kennel. You think men are dogs. No one answered. A cart rattled in the corridor. When the echo died, Marlin lifted his hand, not a punch, a gesture toward the drain. Pick it up, he said. The bullies blinked, unmoving. Go on, Marlin said. Education. The smirker bent like stepping into a cold grave. Fingers closed around the cracked bar. He held it out, waiting for humiliation. Not for me, Marlin said. He pointed to Jay. A hiss of surprise cut the room. Jay's mouth opened, then closed, confusion sparking through the tension. This is about respect, Marlin said. You throw a man's dignity on the floor, you pick it up, you clean it, and you say the words. The smirker stared, like he'd been asked to swallow a razor. The gap-toothed one shifted, rage flaring and retreating. He nudged his buddy to refuse. But the room, the eyes, the hush. Marlin's weight-made refusal looked like suicide. The smirker rinsed the soap, foam pooling at his wrist. He turned to Jay with lowered eyes. The word stuck. He swallowed. I went too far, he said, voice pitched low. Shouldn't have said that. All of it, Marlin said. The bully forced the line, strangled and bloodless. I'm sorry. Jay stared at the soap like a grenade with the pin gone. He didn't reach for it. His breathing was steady. Witnesses, Marlin asked. A dozen answered by nodding. A gray-bearded inmate said, We saw. Another added. He stood. Didn't back down. The gap-toothed bully looked trapped inside his own skin. So that's it, he muttered. You embarrass us. You can't protect him everywhere. Say that again, Marlin said. The man shut his mouth. From the doorway, a sliver of corridor light cut across the tile. Beyond, roll call of dinner trays clattered. Inside the shower, time was measured by steps between disaster and control. Marlin nodded at Jay. Take the soap, he said softly. Jay hesitated, then reached. Not bending, just extending his arm to accept it like a thing restored. Their fingers didn't touch. The bully's hand shook as he gave it over. Now, Marlin said to the pair, You clean the words off this floor, both of you. What words, the gap-toothed one asked. The ones you spit, Marlin said. Start with pup, end with ours. Water hissed, knees hit tile. The lesson began. Men watched with a hunger that wasn't cruelty so much as need for fairness, even the prison version of it. They hadn't come to cheer. They came to remember balance. The bullies scrubbed the floor with their hands, soap slipping, knuckles rasping. Jay stood upright, back straight, a small thing in a place built to reduce men, yet occupying his full height. He didn't gloat. He didn't speak. Marlin stepped beside him, shoulder to shoulder but not touching. Eyes forward, voice low enough for them alone. Keep your head, he said. You don't win by out-shouting noise. You win by outlasting it. Jay nodded, something private turning over in his chest. Across the room the crowd broke. Faucets hissed, towels snapped, footsteps retreated, careful not to splash near the two who cleaned. Before leaving, Marlin looked at the lather smeared across the tiles. When the floor's clear, he told them, So are we. Try me again, and you won't be kneeling. He turned to the room, voice rising. Anyone got a problem with that? No one did. Or if they did, they disguised it as breath. The clang of the door when he left wasn't loud. It didn't need to. It was punctuation that promised there would be more sentences to come. When the crowd dispersed and the hiss of water faded to a dull backdrop, Jay leaned against the cool tile wall. His chest was still tight, though the bullies had been forced to kneel. The humiliation hadn't landed on him, not fully, but the tremor in his hands revealed how close he'd come to breaking. The prison wasn't new to him. He'd been inside only a few weeks, but every day here stretched like an entire year. To the men around him, he was still a rookie, untested, someone without scars, deep enough to buy respect. His brother's shadow protected him, sure, but shadows didn't always cover every corner. He knew it, and he hated that the others knew it too. Jay closed his eyes. For a moment, the steam blurred into another memory, one carried from outside these walls. He was 12 again, sneakers worn down to threads, running down cracked sidewalks in the neighborhood where street lamps flickered like broken stars. Back then, he had been the small one, the kid with the too thin frame and the too big eyes, easy to shove into lockers at school, easy to corner on his walk home. They called him weakling, skinny bones, quiet boy. But he wasn't weak. He learned early to keep his fire under wraps. He'd watch the fists swing at him, feel the bruises swell, and tell himself, don't give them the satisfaction. He'd return home to his mother's worried hands brushing over his cheek, and he'd swallow the pain, offering only a smile so she wouldn't break too. And then there was Marlon, the older brother, 7 years his senior, the one who seemed made of iron. Marlon had carried weight in the neighborhood, respect, fear, leadership. He wasn't just Jay's protector, he was proof that no matter how harsh the streets got, there was someone who could bend them to his will. But Marlon's strength had always been dangerous. It drew fire. It demanded loyalty. And one night when Jay was still only 15, the police dragged Marlon away. Jay had watched the lights flash red and blue against the peeling paint of their apartment and had sworn to himself he'd never end up in the same place. Yet here he was. Jay opened his eyes, staring at the water-streaked floor. He wasn't like the others here. He hadn't beaten a man bloody or stolen for a thrill. His charge had been desperation. Wrong place, wrong choice, wrong company. The weight of his brother's legacy followed him into the courtroom, whispering to the judge, same blood, same fate. But inside, Jay carried something different. He wasn't built on violence, he was built on endurance. That endurance had a cost. It made him quiet, made him look fragile, made him an easy target for men who mistook silence for weakness. From across the shower block, one of the older inmates approached slowly. He was gray-bearded, the same man who had spoken earlier, the one who had confirmed the bully's cruelty. His towel was slung across one shoulder, his eyes sharp, but not unkind. "You held your ground," he said. Jay looked at him, unsure if it was compliment or warning. Didn't feel like it. "That's because you're still breathing heavy. That's normal." The old man studied him. "Most men would have bent. I've seen it 100 times. You didn't." Jay shrugged, water dripping from his chin. "Didn't have a choice." The man chuckled, low and gravelly. "There's always a choice. You chose the harder one." Jay didn't answer. His eyes drifted back toward where his brother had stood minutes earlier. He wanted to believe Marlon's presence was enough, that the weight of his reputation could shield him. But he knew the truth. Shadows faded when the lights went out, and in prison, darkness was everywhere. As he wrapped a towel around his shoulders and walked back to his cell, he passed men who looked at him differently now, some with respect, some with jealousy, and some, the most dangerous kind, with calculation. He was no longer invisible, no longer just the quiet rookie. He was marked. In his cell, Jay sat on the thin mattress, elbows on his knees, staring at the wall. The faint sound of dominoes clacking echoed from the common area. His cellmate was out, thankfully. Jay needed the space. He pressed his palms together, pressing until his knuckles went white. He thought of his mother again. Her voice on the phone the week before had cracked when she said his name. She still believed there was hope, that this was temporary, that he'd walk out of here and into something better. He wanted to believe it, too. But the walls told a different story. He whispered to himself, a mantra. Don't break. Don't bend. The words weren't just for him. They were for the boy who had once been beaten on sidewalks, for the teen who had watched his brother get taken away, for the young man now standing inside the same system that had swallowed them both. Outside the cell, footsteps passed. A voice muttered, "That kid's got fire. Won't last long." Another voice replied, "Maybe not. Unless the boss keeps him close." Jay closed his eyes again, leaning back against the cold wall. He didn't want to be protected forever. He didn't want to be just the boss's brother. He wanted to be his own man, one who stood on his own strength. But here, that strength would be tested in ways he had never imagined. He inhaled deeply, letting the sour smell of disinfectant and rusted bars fill his lungs. His heart slowed, steadying. He would endure. He always had. But deep down, he also knew endurance wasn't enough. Not here. Not in a place where men fed on weakness, where survival meant more than staying quiet. Somewhere inside him, a decision was forming. Quiet, but sharp. The bullies thought they'd humiliated him. His brother thought he'd shielded him. But Jay was beginning to realize that his story would not be written by either of them. For the first time since his sentencing, a flicker of something else stirred in him. Anger. Not the reckless kind, but the kind that sat heavy, coiled, waiting. And in that moment, as the iron bars rattled shut for lights out, Jay understood something he hadn't before. He wasn't just here to survive. He was here to change the game. The next morning carried a different weight. The cell block stirred awake with the clang of metal doors, the bark of guards, and the shuffle of boots on concrete. Breakfast trays clattered, the smell of powdered eggs and burnt toast drifting through the air. For most inmates, it was just another cycle in the endless routine. For Jay, it was the calm before something he knew was coming. He could feel it in the way eyes lingered on him as he stepped into the cafeteria line. Conversations hushed when he passed. Some nodded with the faintest trace of respect. Others smirked knowingly, waiting for the pendulum to swing back. In prison, reputation was currency, and last night's scene in the showers had put too much in Jay's pocket. At a corner table, the two bullies sat with trays untouched, their posture coiled. Gaptooth's grin was gone, replaced with the twitchy tension of a man who'd been forced to kneel. His partner kept rolling his shoulders, cracking his knuckles as though to remind everyone, including himself, that his fists hadn't lost their edge. Jay carried his tray to an empty spot, careful not to look in their direction. He kept his back straight, his head level, refusing to show nerves. But his stomach was a knot. He knew humiliation didn't die overnight. It bred. "Look who's here," a voice called across the room. It wasn't the bullies. It was another inmate, heavyset with tattoos of flames licking his neck. He gestured toward Jay with his fork, his voice pitched to carry. The pup who made the pit bulls scrubbed the floor. Laughter broke out, uneven and sharp. Some found it funny, some dangerous. Jay froze mid-bite, the taste of powdered eggs turning to ash in his mouth. The bullies didn't laugh. They stared, eyes locked on him, their silence more threatening than words. "Careful, boy," another inmate said from 2 tables down, leaning back in his chair. "Heroes don't live long here." The room buzzed with energy now, every eye ricocheting between Jay and the men who had been shamed. It was blood in the water, and the sharks were circling. Jay forced himself to eat, slow and steady. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of rattling him. His brother wasn't here to intervene this time. He was alone, surrounded by spectators who cared more for the show than the outcome. Gaptooth finally stood, his chair scraping loud against the concrete. The sound cut through the chatter, dragging silence behind it. He carried his tray in one hand, swaggering toward Jay with a predator's smile, slowly resurfacing. His partner followed, rolling his neck side to side. Jay's fork hovered over his plate. He didn't move. "Morning, pup," Gaptooth said, setting his tray down across from Jay without asking, his grin spread wide enough to show the jagged hole where his tooth should be. "Sleep good? Dream about soap?" The cafeteria rippled with laughter. Some men slapped the table, others whistled. Jay looked at him, his face calm, but his eyes burning. "You really want to do this again?" Gaptooth leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Do? Nah. We already did. But see, you embarrassed me last night. That don't wash off easy. Gonna have to rinse it with something stronger." His partner set his tray down, too, looming over Jay with arms crossed. The crowd edged closer, subtle at first, then more obvious chair scraping, bodies forming a loose circle around the table. "Let's make this fair," Gaptooth said, voice oily with mock reason. He pulled the spoon from his tray, twirling it in his hand like a weapon. "You don't gotta bend this time. Just gotta prove you're not soft." "And how's he supposed to do that?" someone asked from the crowd. Gaptooth's grin widened. He pointed the spoon at Jay's chest. "Fight me, right here. No brother, no backup, just you and me. Win, you get respect. Lose." He dragged a finger across his throat. The cafeteria buzzed louder now, men leaning in with hungry eyes. Even the guards at the far end didn't seem in a hurry to intervene. A fight meant entertainment. A fight meant control. Jay's heart pounded, but his face stayed unreadable. "You want to fight because you lost face. That's all this is," he said. Gaptooth slammed the spoon down hard enough to rattle the trays. "No, pup. I want to fight because I'm tired of looking at you standing tall like you belong here. You don't. And today, everybody's gonna see it." The crowd pressed closer, voices chanting low, rising. "Fight, fight, fight." Jay's stomach twisted. He wasn't afraid of pain. He'd felt that before. He was afraid of what this would mean. A fight meant escalation. A fight meant more eyes, more enemies, but refusing meant something worse. Refusing meant weakness, and weakness here was a death sentence. He looked at the circle around him, at the faces waiting for blood, at the guards pretending not to notice. His brother's absence was louder than any chant. Gaptooth leaned in, close enough that Jay could smell the sour tang of his breath. "Pick your choice, pup. Bend or bleed." The spoon tapped the table. Clink, clink, clink. Jay's hand closed around his fork, knuckles whitening. His eyes never left Gaptooth's. And then, before he could answer, the heavyset inmate with flames tattooed on his neck shouted, "He won't fight! He's hiding behind his brother's name!" The room roared with approval. The chant changed, sharp and cruel. "Coward, coward, coward." Jay's throat tightened. His ears rang with the sound. Every instinct screamed at him to lash out, to slam the fork into Gaptooth's smirk, to silence the noise. But another instinct, deeper, whispered, "Not yet. Timing matters. Always timing." Gaptooth saw the hesitation and smiled like a man who had already won. He stood, lifting his tray, and upended it across Jay's lap. Lukewarm food smeared down his shirt, eggs and toast sliding into his lap. The crowd howled with laughter, slapping tables, jeering. Jay's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. Gaptooth leaned down, whispering in his ear, words meant only for him. "Next time you won't have a crowd, and I won't bring a spoon." He straightened, his grin blazing with triumph, and the crowd cheered louder. Jay sat there, clothes soaked with humiliation, every muscle locked in restraint. He met Gaptooth's eyes with a look that wasn't broken, but wasn't victory either. It was a promise, silent and sharp, that this wasn't over. And as the guards finally barked orders and shoved the crowd back, Jay realized something chilling. The real fight hadn't even started yet. The cafeteria incident left a bruise on Jay's dignity deeper than fists could reach. By the time he returned to his cell, the whispers had spread like wildfire through every corridor. The pup wouldn't fight. He could still feel the sticky smear of eggs drying on his shirt. The laughter ringing in his ears long after the doors clanged shut. That night, lying on his cot with the thin blanket pulled over him, Jay stared at the ceiling, listening to the echoes of the block snoring, coughing, muttered prayers. Sleep didn't come. Instead, he replayed the moment again and again, the crowd chanting "coward," the smug grin of Gaptooth, the heat of rage in his chest. When morning came, he was hollow-eyed but alert. Something in the air had shifted. Even the guards' footsteps sounded heavier, like they sensed the storm brewing. By afternoon, Jay felt the net tightening. Men he didn't know brushed against him in the yard, shoulder checks that seemed casual but weren't. Others stared too long, measuring him, gauging what the pup was worth. It was as though the entire prison had decided he was no longer a rookie, he was prey. In the corner of the yard, Gaptooth and his partner leaned against the chain-link fence, heads close together. Their eyes never left Jay. They didn't need to approach him directly anymore. Their power was in the anticipation, the promise of what was coming. And then came the message. A folded scrap of paper slipped under his cell door during count. Jay picked it up, unfolded it with trembling hands. Scrawled in block letters were 5 words: shower, tonight, no brother. His heart slammed against his ribs. He crumpled the paper in his fist. The showers again. The place of his first humiliation. The place his brother had saved him. Only this time, Marlin wouldn't be there. The bullies had chosen their ground carefully. All day, Jay felt the clock ticking toward night. His stomach churned with acid, every clang of the gates tightening around him. He tried to eat, but couldn't. He tried to steady his breath, but each inhale rattled like broken glass. By the time evening fell, he knew there was no escape. Guards turned blind eyes when inmates settled their own scores. The block wanted blood, and tonight it would get it. When the order came for showers, Jay walked with the others, his steps measured but heavy. He could feel eyes on his back, whispers trailing him down the corridor. The moment he stepped inside the tiled room, he knew. The trap was sprung. The steam hung thick, clinging to skin, blurring the edges of the fluorescent light. But through it, Jay saw them waiting. Gaptooth and his partner, posted near the far wall, their bodies coiled like wolves at the edge of a clearing. The other inmates spread out, taking spots along the walls, turning the room into a silent arena. Some pretended to wash. Most didn't bother. They were here to witness. Jay walked slowly to an empty shower head, water cascading over his shoulders. His pulse thundered in his ears. He tried to focus on the spray, on the rhythm of droplets hitting tile, but every sense screamed danger. Gaptooth moved first, strolling toward him with the lazy confidence of a man who knew the script was already written. His grin gleamed in the harsh light. "Evening, pup," he said, voice dripping venom. "Heard you been busy dodging fights. Thought maybe you'd like some exercise tonight?" The laughter from the crowd was low, cruel, like the growl of an audience ready for slaughter. Jay didn't answer. He stared straight ahead, fists clenched at his sides, the water beating down on him. Gaptooth's partner circled to his left, cutting off escape. The circle closed tighter. "You embarrassed us," the partner said, his tone cold, deliberate. "You made us kneel. You think that stands?" "Nah. Tonight you pay." Gaptooth leaned in close, his breath sour against Jay's ear. "Nobody's here to save you now. No brother, no boss. Just us. Just you. Let's see what you're really made of." The crowd murmured, shifting on their feet, anticipation building like static before a lightning strike. Jay's heart hammered, his body screamed to fight, to lash out, to do anything but stand there, but another voice inside whispered of futility. 2 against 1. A circle of witnesses hungry for violence. What chance did he really have? Gaptooth shoved him hard, slamming him against the wet tile. Jay's head cracked against the wall, stars bursting in his vision. Laughter erupted around him. "Still standing?" Gaptooth mocked. He shoved again, harder, not for long. Jay staggered but caught himself, breath ragged, blood running from a cut on his scalp. His vision blurred, the room spinning. The partner stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Let's drop him." The crowd surged closer, water splashing as men jostled for a better view. Some chanted his name, mocking cruel. Others just shouted for blood. Gaptooth raised his fist. "Time to end this, pup." Jay's knees trembled. His chest heaved. His brother's words echoed faintly in his head. "You don't win by outshouting noise. You win by outlasting it. But how do you outlast fists? How do you outlast hate?" He saw the punch coming, a blur of muscle and fury. He ducked instinctively, the fist crashing into the wall where his head had been. Tile cracked, dust mixing with steam. The crowd roared. Gaptooth snarled, swing again. This time Jay couldn't dodge. The blow smashed into his ribs, white-hot pain exploding through his side. He collapsed to one knee, gasping, the air ripped from his lungs. The partner moved in, grabbing his hair, yanking his head back. Jay's eyes watered, pain screaming down his spine. He tried to twist free, but the grip was iron. The crowd howled now, the noise deafening, vibrating off the tiles. The bullies grinned, feeding off it, savoring their dominance. Jay's vision swam. His knees scraped the tile. Blood mingled with water, streaking down the drain. He felt the humiliation sinking in, heavier than the blows. He was on the ground. Again. And this time, nobody was coming through that door. Gaptooth crouched in front of him, fist poised. His voice was low, meant only for Jay. "This is where you break." The crowd fell into a hush, every man leaning in, breathless, waiting for the decisive strike. Jay's lips parted, not in surrender but in something else, something no one could hear over the roar in his ears, because somewhere beneath the pain and humiliation, a spark refused to die. But as Gaptooth's fist rose heavy as a hammer, it looked for everyone watching like the end, like the pup was finally about to be put down. The fist hovered in the steam-heavy air, suspended like a pendulum about to swing. Every man in the showers held his breath, eyes fixed on Gaptooth, waiting for the moment he'd bring it down. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hiss of water spraying from rusted pipes and the faint hum of electricity in the overhead lights. And then, at the very edge of impact, Gaptooth froze. Not because of mercy didn't exist here, but because Jay's eyes had changed. They weren't wide with fear anymore. They weren't dulled with defeat. They locked onto him with something deeper, something raw and unwavering. Not a plea, not surrender, a challenge. Gaptooth sneered, shaken for half a beat, then slammed his fist down anyway. It smashed into Jay's cheek, snapping his head sideways. Blood sprayed across the tile. The crowd erupted in guttural approval, a dozen voices merging into a storm of sound. Jay slumped to the floor, hands pressed against the tile slick with soap and blood. His ribs ached with every breath, his vision a red haze, but through it all, he still stared up at Gaptooth, eyes burning. It unsettled the bully more than the punch had satisfied him. He's seen men beg, cry, curl up, but he'd never seen a man look like that while broken on the ground. "What are you smiling at?" Gaptooth snapped. Though Jay's lips hadn't moved, his own voice cracked, the confidence dented. Jay coughed, blood staining his teeth, and whispered just loud enough for the crowd to catch, "This ain't over." A murmur rippled through the room. The words weren't shouted, but they landed heavy, stirring something in the watchers. Gaptooth scowled and yanked Jay upright by his collar. "You don't get to talk." The partner stepped closer, eager to finish it, but before he could swing, a sharp whistle cut the air. One of the older inmates, Graybeard, the same man from before, stood near the wall, his face unreadable. "Enough," he said. The crowd quieted, though no one dared side with him openly. "Mind your business, old man," Gaptooth growled, but the old man didn't flinch. His eyes rested on Jay, then flicked to the bullies. "You don't even see it, do you?" "See what?" The partner spat. The old man's lips curled into something between a smile and a warning. "You picked the wrong bloodline." The room stirred uneasily. Men exchanged glances, whispers darting through the steam. Bloodline. The word carried weight here, heavier than fists. Gaptooth laughed, harsh and hollow. "All I see is a pup with his nose broke." But doubt flickered across the crowd now, weaving through the ranks of men who had come to witness humiliation. They began muttering, voices low like echoes of a secret everyone wanted to remember, but had forgotten. Jay spat blood onto the floor, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and whispered again. Not over. His tone was calm, steady, almost prophetic. Gaptooth shoved him back down, snarling. "You don't get to—" "Why do you think the boss walked in that night?" The Graybeard interrupted, his voice cutting clean through the bully's rage. The partner bristled. Coincidence. He was just there. The old man shook his head slowly. "There are no coincidences here. Not in this place. Not when it comes to him." The weight of the words settled. Men shuffled uneasily, eyes darting between Jay and the bullies, between the bleeding kid on the ground and the phantom of authority looming behind him. Gaptooth's bravado faltered for just a second, though he covered it with a sneer. "He ain't his brother. He's nothing." Jay coughed again, but even through the blood, his stare never broke. "Keep telling yourself that." The words were quiet, almost swallowed by the hiss of the pipes, but they landed like stones. A few men near the back leaned forward, curious now instead of entertained. Gaptooth swung his fist again, more desperate this time, slamming it into Jay's ribs. Jay collapsed with a groan, body curling against the pain. The crowd roared again, but the sound was thinner now, uncertain. They weren't sure if they were watching victory or the beginning of something else. The partner crouched low, grabbing Jay by the chin, forcing him to look up. "Say you're done. Say it now, or we'll make sure you don't walk out of here." Jay's chest heaved, breath ragged. His jaw trembled with pain, but the fire in his eyes didn't dim. He forced the words out, broken but sharp. "I don't bend," the crowd gasped. Some chuckled nervously. Others murmured like they were hearing an oath, not defiance. Gaptooth's fury boiled over. He raised his fist high again, ready to smash it down for the final blow. But before he could swing, a loud clang echoed from the corridor. The heavy metal door. The crowd froze, every head snapping toward the entrance. No one came through. The silence stretched. Gaptooth's fist trembled in the air. His confidence cracked. He remembered the last time that door had opened. Remembered who had stepped through. Remembered how quickly the room had changed. The door stayed shut, but the possibility of it opening, the memory of authority tied to it, hung in the air like a ghost. The crowd's whispers grew louder now, rippling through the steam. Bloodline, brother, boss. Jay, still kneeling on the wet tile, lifted his chin with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. His lips curled into the faintest smile, blood staining his teeth. "Scared of doors now?" he rasped. The crowd laughed not at him, but at the bullies. It was small, but it was enough. Gaptooth's face twisted, caught between rage and unease. For the first time, the power in the room wasn't his. The old man spoke again, voice calm, almost reverent. "You don't see it yet, but you will." Gaptooth's partner shoved Jay back against the tile, snarling. "Shut him up." But even as Jay hit the floor again, gasping, bleeding, broken, he smiled, not wide, not cocky, just enough to let them know something they didn't. Something was coming, and for the first time, the crowd believed it. The crowd's whispers swelled like a storm rising from the ocean. Bloodline, brother, boss. The words bounced off the tiles, threading through the steam, building momentum with every breath. Gaptooth still loomed over Jay, fist raised, but his confidence wavered. His eyes darted to the door, then back to the bleeding teen on the floor. His knuckles shook, not from the weight of his blow, but from the sudden shift in the air. Jay, battered and hunched against the wall, coughed and spat blood onto the tiles. His lips curled into a faint smile, the kind of smile that cut deeper than fists. His voice rasped, but carried clearly. "You can't break what runs in my veins." The crowd hushed, leaning in, electricity buzzing between them. Gaptooth scoffed, his sneer too sharp, too defensive, big talk from a kid crawling on the floor. But before his fist could fall, the heavy metal door groaned open. The clang was thunder in the confined space, silencing every voice. Marlin stepped inside. The steam parted around him as if even the air respected his presence. Broad-shouldered tattoos carved like scripture across his skin, eyes as cold as iron. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to gesture. His presence alone shifted the axis of the room. Every man in the showers instinctively straightened. Some lowered their eyes, others froze mid-breath. The bullies stiffened, their bravado bleeding out of them. Marlin's gaze found Jay first, his brother, his blood. He didn't speak, but his eyes burned with something that was equal parts fury and pride. Jay, bruised and bloodied, lifted his chin just enough to show he wasn't broken. Their eyes locked, a silent conversation of 1,000 shared years. Then Marlin turned. His gaze landed on Gaptooth, who still hovered with his fist raised. The bully's hand trembled before he slowly lowered it. Every ounce of bravado evaporating under that stare. "You touched my blood," Marlin said. His voice was low, steady, a blade dragged across stone. Gaptooth swallowed hard. "Boss, we were just—" Silence. The word cracked like a whip. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a verdict. The room fell dead still. Marlin stepped closer, water dripping from his hairline, his shadow swallowing the space between them. "When you touch him," he said, pointing to Jay, "you touch me. When you humiliate him, you humiliate me. And when you raise your hand to him." He paused, letting the silence suffocate the bullies. "You sign your own death warrant." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the guards outside shifted uneasily, hearing his words echo through the vents. Gaptooth tried to stand his ground, but his knees buckled slightly. His partner shifted back, sweat mixing with the steam on his face. "This is prison," Marlin continued, his eyes never leaving them. "Power here isn't in fists, it's in blood, and my blood runs through him." He pointed at Jay, who still sat against the tile, battered but unbroken. "From this moment on, you look at him the way you look at me. You bow to him the way you bow to me. His voice is my voice. His command is my command." The words detonated in the room. The crowd stirred, some nodding, others whispering. The hierarchy had shifted in a single breath. Gaptooth stammered, his bravado shriveling. "Boss, we didn't." Marlin closed the distance, so close their foreheads nearly touched. His whisper was venom. "Begging won't save you." The partner stepped forward, desperation in his eyes. "We didn't mean—" Marlin's hand shot out, gripping him by the throat, lifting him half off the ground with terrifying ease. The man gagged, clawing at his wrist, feet scraping against wet tile. The crowd gasped, but didn't move. No one dared. Marlin let him dangle there for a moment, a silent demonstration of absolute dominance, then released him. The man collapsed to the floor, coughing, choking. Gaptooth backed away a step, his face pale. "We didn't know." "That's your mistake," Marlin said, his voice cutting. "You should have known." Jay struggled to his feet, leaning on the wall for balance. His ribs screamed in protest, his cheeks swollen. But he forced himself upright. He wouldn't let the crowd see him kneel again. Not now. Marlin turned back to him, his voice softening just slightly. "You still standing?" Jay nodded, blood dripping from his lip. "Always." Marlin's jaw tightened with pride. He turned back to the bullies. "You see, he bleeds. But he doesn't bend. He's my blood." The crowd shifted, murmurs swelling into open declarations. His brother, the boss's blood, the new heir. Gaptooth's eyes darted from Marlin to Jay, desperation overtaking fury. It was a mistake. "We'll back off. Marlin cut him off with a single glare. Then he addressed the entire room. "This block belongs to me. Everyone here knows that. But I won't be here forever. Power doesn't die with me. It passes. And tonight, you've all seen where it passes to." He gestured to Jay, battered but unbroken, standing like a survivor who had earned his scars. "He is me. He is mine. Remember that." The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in murmurs of acceptance, recognition. The shift was complete. Jay was no longer the pup, no longer just the rookie. He was heir to the throne carved into concrete and steel. Gaptooth and his partner lowered their eyes, their silence an admission of defeat, deeper than any broken bone. Jay's chest heaved, pain radiating through his body, but inside, something new surged. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving. He was standing in power, cloaked in the authority of his bloodline, and every man in that room knew it. The showers were still heavy with steam, but the atmosphere had changed. What once reeked of cruelty and spectacle now pulsed with a quiet awe. Men stood straighter, their whispers hushed. The bullies who had once commanded laughter now looked like children caught stealing, their pride stripped bare. Marlin's voice lingered in the air, his declaration undeniable. Jay was no longer just another inmate. He was the bloodline, the heir, the shadow of authority that would not be dimmed. The crowd knew it, and the bullies knew it most of all. Gaptooth swallowed, his jaw twitching as he glanced at his partner. The fight was gone from his eyes, replaced by something new. Fear. His knuckles still dripped with Jay's blood, but his hand trembled, useless, like it no longer belonged to him. Jay stood against the wall, his chest heaving, ribs screaming with pain, but his back unbent. The defiance in his eyes burned brighter now, stoked by his brother's presence. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was standing in victory, battered but undefeated. Marlon took a step closer to the bullies. His voice was calm, each word precise, lethal. You think humiliation is a weapon? You think fists are power? No. Power is what keeps men from daring to touch you. Power is when even a whisper of your name makes cowards pause. He pointed to Jay. That power belongs to him now. The bullies lowered their heads. Their silence, a surrender. The crowd shifted, murmurs of acceptance spreading like wildfire. Jay's humiliation had been turned into elevation. The pup had become a lion in the eyes of men who understood only dominance. Marlon's gaze hardened. Kneel. Gaptooth's eyes widened. Boss! Kneel, Marlon repeated, his tone final. The partner hesitated, looking for escape, but there was none. The circle of inmates around them had closed. No one would interfere. No one would save them. Slowly, with visible shame, the bullies sank to their knees on the wet tile, their heads bowed. The crowd gasped. Forcing a man to kneel in prison was worse than a beating. It was a permanent mark, a scar that never faded. Marlon's lips curled into the faintest smile. Now apologize. Not to me. To him. The bullies' throats worked, but the words stuck. Say it, Marlon commanded. Gaptooth finally croaked, a bee's hollow. I'm sorry. Jay stared at him, blood trickling from his lip, but his expression was unreadable. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He only watched as the men who had tormented him were forced to bend lower than they had ever imagined. The partner's voice followed, bitter and weak. Sorry. Marlon nodded. Louder. So every man in this room hears you. They repeated it, louder this time, their humiliation echoing against the tile. The crowd listened in silence, the balance of power rewritten before their eyes. Jay straightened, his pain nearly dropping him, but his pride holding him upright. I accept, he said finally, his voice steady, his gaze unflinching. But don't mistake this for forgiveness. This is the last time you put your hands on me. The words hung in the air like a decree, heavier than any guard's order. The crowd erupted not in jeers, not in laughter, but in murmurs of respect. Heads nodded. Men exchanged looks. The message was clear. The boy who had once been mocked as a pup was untouchable now. Marlon placed a hand briefly on Jay's shoulder, steadying him. It wasn't just support. It was a crown passed quietly, a recognition of strength. Walk out with me, Marlon said. Jay did. Step by step, battered but unbroken, he walked past the kneeling bullies, past the silent crowd, past the steam that had witnessed his trial by fire. Each step was victory. Each gaze he met a confirmation of his place. As they left the showers, the clang of the heavy door behind them was different this time. It wasn't just the sound of steel. It was the sound of judgment closing, of an old order collapsing and a new one rising. Back in the corridor, Jay staggered, pain finally catching him. Marlon caught his arm, steadying him. You did more than I expected, Marlon said softly. Jay managed a bloody smile. I didn't break. Marlon nodded, pride glinting in his eyes. That's what makes you mine. They walked together down the long hallway. Two shadows stretched across the concrete, one forged in iron, the other rising from fire. Inside the showers, the bullies still knelt, their humiliation etched into the memory of every witness. No one would ever forget. No one would dare challenge what had been declared. Jay had entered prison as prey. He had been pushed, mocked, cornered. broken down. But now, in the eyes of every man who had seen him endure, he was something more. He was not just the boss's brother. He was the boss's blood. And in a place where blood defined everything, that meant survival. That meant power. That meant respect, carved into the very walls. As the night settled over the prison, whispers spread from cell to cell, from block to block. They tried to break him. They failed. He stood. He's Marlon's blood. Jay lay in his cell, ribs aching, face bruised, but sleep came easier than it had in weeks. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, telling him he was stronger than the world believed. For the first time, he believed it too. The pup was gone. In his place stood a man no one would ever force to bend again.